Go ahead.
Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Board of Licensed Dietitians. Meeting is convening at 9:12 a.m. on April 17th, 2024. This meeting is being held in person and by MS Teams video conference and is being recorded. The recording will be posted in the internet for public viewing. The Health Licensing Office asks that individuals attending through MS Teams keep your phone muted and cameras off during the entire meeting until you are given an opportunity to comment during the public and interested parties feedback period if indicated as indicated on the agenda. Please do not use the chat feature during meetings. I will now call roll. We know Yulia Broddorf is not here. Russ Cagle?
Here.
Sarah Lowe?
Present.
Danica Oldfelt? I see her. Is that good enough, or does it have to be verbal, Robert?
She needs to acknowledge, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Danica, can you take yourself on mute, please?
She moved.
You're still on mute, Danica. Moving on to Jesse Pavlinac, who is present. What do we do now, Robert? Okay.
Wait until we get an acknowledgement
Okay.
from Danica that she's there.
Okay. Yes, Danica, we have to have a verbal present or here or some verbal acknowledgement, please.
We've lost quorum. We gotta stop.
Do we have either a cell phone number or an email to send to her? You're doing that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, yes, we are.
Thank you. Excuse me. Danica has her hand raised. Maybe that is her acknowledgement that she's present. Is that okay?
Verbal. Danica, can you take yourself off mute if you can hear us? And we are reaching out to you by phone also, Danica. we are communicating with her and getting her set up.
Thank you for the update.
Oh, I can hear. Yeah, I can hear. Cool. Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Danica. Are you there?
I'm so sorry about that.
Problem. Okay, so we're doing roll call. So I guess you acknowledge you're here?
I'm here.
Okay.
Thank you. Members, when you wish to speak, please state your last name for the record. Board members are asked to not use the chat feature during the meetings. Public members wishing to speak must first sign in on the roster sheet available, or if you're attending by MS Teams, please email Carrie Edwards at carrierwards@oha.oregon.gov and provide your first and last name. Public and interested parties' feedback may be heard during the public interested parties feedback period if indicated on the agenda. Everyone is asked to use appropriate language, manners, and protocols when conducting board business. This meeting is now called to order.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Bob Bothwell. I am currently the interim director here at the Health Licensing Office. And I wanted to make a couple of announcements. One being Jerry Yoker, who was on the board, resigned. So that's why you don't see his name on your roll call list. Secondly, in the announcement, it says board members are asked not to use a chat feature. The chat feature actually should be turned off, but earlier I saw, I believe it was a public member sending a chat. So it should be please no chat usage during the board meeting. It's all a matter of public record and we need to capture everything. Okay. With that being done, first item on the agenda is to have a motion for approval of the agenda.
May I ask a question, Robert?
Yes, ma'am.
Many boards I've been on, the chair cannot offer a motion. Is that true for this board? Since I am just figuring out what I'm doing here today?
You are correct, and thank you for catching that.
Okay.
We would have stopped you. So
Thank
anybody
you.
other than Jesse, the chair, making a motion would be appropriate.
I make a motion, Kegel, that we open the meeting.
Approve the agenda.
and approve the agenda.
Yep. And if somebody can give us a second,
Good morning, this is Sarah Lowe. I'll second.
thank you, Sarah. Chair, a first had been made and a second. Can you please call roll?
Oh, yes, thank you. Sorry.
And include yourself in that.
And include myself in that. Thank
Yes,
you
ma'am.
very much. Sarah Lowe,
Present.
Aye.
do you approve the motion?
Aye. Oh, yep,
Aye,
I'm sorry.
yes.
I thought you were calling roll.
No, it's okay. We're confused today.
I apologize.
Danica Olfeld. Please indicate aye if you approve the agenda. Thank you. Russ Cagle,
Aye.
Jesse Pavlinak, aye.
Okay, thank you. The approval agenda has passed. Next item on the list is the director's report. And first item on the director's report, if anybody's following online, it is slide 7. And if I'm not looking at the camera, it's because I'm looking at my other screen. We have the board membership. Julia Brockdorf is currently the chair. She is in her second term, and that expires April 2025, and cannot report. Jesse Pavlinak is the vice chair and acting chair today. Jesse is in her first term, and it expires June 29, 2026, and Jesse can reappoint. Sarah Lowe is in her first term. It expires October 17th, 20 expired.
It did. I had a question about this. I actually asked when I got the email
Uh-huh.
for this meeting because someone had reached out to me, asked me if I wanted to renew, and I said yes, but didn't get any further instruction on it. And so I said, I thought it expired in October, but they said nope.
I see Derek Fultz is on the line. Derek, are you there?
I am here. Yes, this is Derek. Yeah, so Sarah, your term did expire. I did send you information, but I can always resend it to you if you're interested in serving again.
Oh yeah, that's totally fine. If you could send that to me, that would be great. I don't know
Okay,
if you
I
guys
will
want
do
me
that.
to continue on this call.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
And yeah, if you don't, we're out of quorum. So you are a board member until replaced or till you re-up. So
Oh, okay. Okay.
okay. Okay, moving on. Danica Ofelt, first term expires 3/28/2027 and can reappoint. Gerald has resigned. Russ Cagle, public member, second term expires May 31, 2025, and Russ cannot reappoint. And Graham McPartland is in first term and another public member. That term expires April 9, 2028, and Graham can reappoint. Moving on to licensing and fiscal statistical reports. That's a mouthful for this early. So there's several slides. I'm starting with slide 10, and I'm not going to read each quarter. I will speak fiscal year 2024 for the next several slides. So in fiscal year 2024, we've had a total of 314 licenses issued. In the same fiscal year so far, we've had 864 licenses renewed on slide 11. Licenses by age and gender. By far, it appears all identify as female, and it looks like it's a really very young populated group. Licensing trends going in the right direction. Fiscal year 2024, quarter 3, 1,445 licenses. And the financials for the board in 2024, we had a beginning balance of $230,708 and revenues of 79,183, expenditures of 77,328. and $1,855 net operation costs with an ending cash balance of $232,563. And with the difference between the beginning balance and ending cash balance, board sits in a very good spot. Not too much and not too little, just right. On slide 16, if we're ready to move on, is the regulatory report, and the regulatory manager is not available today. So I will do the report for him, and
I am here.
oh, there you are. Okay,
I was
go ahead,
just in the
Trampus.
mass. How's it going?
Good, welcome.
I am here, and I'm Trampus Sheck. I'm the interim regulatory manager for HLO, and I'm here to talk about the regular report. It's pretty small. We have 2 biennium on here. The one that we're currently in, and the one that we just previously exited in last June. As you can see, for that 2023 biennium, we received 4 complaints during that time frame. 3 of those complaints are closed. 1 is still open and being investigated, I believe, still. And then the 2025 biennium, the one we're currently in, is we have received 3 complaints, all of which are still open. So we got a little bit going on with regulatory. We might have some that end up coming to the board for some review at a future meeting, but none at this meeting at this time. You can see complaints by type. We have licensing concerns and services provided. You can see that of the 7 complaints we've gotten over the last couple of years, 3 were about licensing concerns and 4 were about services provided. So licensing concerns would be either somebody is practicing when they're inactive, or or claiming to be a licensed dietitian when they're not. And then services provided would be, more kind of self-explanatory, more along the lines of a practice standard, or somebody was upset from the services that they provided and believed that they were outside of the standards of practice for the profession. And you can see that we have complainants by type is the last little box over there, and that one is we have received no anonymous complaints, which kind of makes sense for a board like this, where it's not a lot of licensing concerns, but they chose not to be anonymous. 2 of the concerns came from clients, so that's pretty self-explanatory. Other is kind of the catch-all category. It could be somebody that's connected to a client but is not the client. It could be another person in the profession. Could just be some member of the general public that just made a complaint, that put it out there on behalf of somebody else, or just, hey, this person is working on license or something like that. So that is the regulatory report. Does anybody have any questions about this, or about investigations or regulatory in general that I can answer for anyone?
See, the chair's hand is up. Jesse,
All right.
you're muted.
Just clarification for me, Mr. Trampus. What stimulates bringing complaints to the board, and what do you guys handle from a staff perspective? I'm relatively new, and so I'm just trying to get my head around it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so that's a good question. So anybody can file a complaint about anybody, about anything. And people will file complaints. If something on here could just be, hey, I didn't like what my dietitian was wearing at our appointment. And we would have to receive that complaint and open it. We would then subsequently close it because it wouldn't have any. There was no. Once we get the complaint, we have to vet it and say, okay, does this actually allege that there was a law or rule that it was potentially violated? If there was, then if a reasonable person could come to that conclusion that if everything in this complaint was true, there would be a violation possibly. So we'll move forward with an investigation. It'll go get assigned to an investigator, and they'll go through the process of investigating it. Probably talk to the complainant, talk, any witnesses that might be, necessary, talk to the person who the complaint's against, get any records, those kind of things, bring that all together and put that together in a package. If at the end of that, the allegations don't kind of come out to be, there's no violations that are even being alleged, or no violations that are substantiated, then that case would either close out, or if there was any kind of ambiguity about it, we'd bring it to the board to look at that case. If there was any potential violations, then we would also, of course, bring that to the board, and the board would be able to review that. They would review that. You would review that outside of this public session in an executive session that was exempt from public disclosure. So we would talk about all the details, and the board could make some recommendations about what they thought should happen with the case. And then we would go from there. And there's a whole process that happens after that.
I'm sure there is.
If we chose to go to discipline.
Yeah.
That is basically the whole thing is the contested case process. But yeah, so we'll bring in complaints. Any complaint gets looked at. Any complaint gets at least vetted. And if there's any chance that there might be an issue, we're going to assign it to an investigator and start moving through the process.
Sure.
Yeah, and then as you on the report, the categories may seem obvious, but open just means that it is either still being investigated, is in some kind of administrative state of review, like it's come to me and I'm reviewing it, or it's waiting to go to the board, or has been reviewed by the board and the discipline hasn't gone out. So it could be kind of this whole area of just not finalized. Closed would mean that it's closed, or we've gotten to the point where we decided to issue some kind of a disciplinary notice, and we've issued that notice. There may be some stuff that goes on beyond that notice, of course, but that's kind of where it would drop off of open to closed. We're not in any of those situations right now. We're not in any ongoing disciplinary action with dietitians that I'm aware of right now. But that's kind of the categories. We're not in any of those squishy gray areas right now. So stuff that's open is being investigated. Stuff that's closed is done right
It's
now.
fine.
So
Thanks for that clarification.
yeah, no problem. Any other questions?
Okay.
All right.
Seeing
thank you, everybody.
none. Thanks, Trappus.
Mhm.
One thing I skipped over in the licensing and fiscal statistical reports that I didn't see on the agenda was, and it'd probably be better under policy, but it was noted that the chair had some question or wanted to discuss a reciprocity.
Yes, and when I emailed this to Ann, I had no idea it would be the chair of this meeting, so the chair did not submit this. This is an interested board member. So just for that clarification, since we have a number of guests today, which is pretty exciting since it's not this well attended normally. So I did have questions about reciprocity, and just some background. I've been involved with this licensing effort before it ever went through back in my earlier career, and been following the board, et cetera, over the last several years. This is my first time serving on this, but I have gotten, I'm fairly well known in the state, so I tend to get emails from people going like, why is this happening? So I wanted some clarification about our reciprocity process. And I know Ann knows that I had these questions last fall, and I know it went through the staff and the legal determinants. But I do understand that we have in place a statement about reciprocity of someone who holds current licensure under the law of any other state or territory of the United States. If the requirements for licensure of dietitians in that the state or territory in which the applicant license are not less than those required in Oregon law. So in Oregon, we have licensed dietitians. We don't have licensed nutritionists. And it's my understanding that we have licensed some people that have been either certified nutritionists or licensed nutritionists in other states, but do not meet the qualifications of a dietitian. And if I just looked at the state of Washington, they have certainly different definitions where a dietitian or a certified dietitian, because they don't have licensure, means a person certified to the practice dietetics under chapter blah, blah, blah. And a nutritionist or certified nutrition means a person certified to provide general nutrition services under this chapter. Dietitians are trained in medical nutrition therapy. There's all sorts of legal definitions about that. But nutritionists are not necessarily have that same expertise or education. And even the Medicare, excuse me, I'm looking at my other screen also, Robert.
You're fine.
Even Medicare has a distinction between nutritionists and dietitians. And so my question is how does reciprocity apply if someone holds a certified or a licensed nutritionist in another state versus a licensed dietitian? The reason why people want licensed dietitian to be a licensed dietitian in Oregon is then you will meet the qualifications of Medicare because they require you to be licensed in order to provide, become a Medicare provider. But if you aren't a dietitian in another state, how could you be a licensed dietitian in the state of Oregon? Because if you are a licensed or a certified dietitian in another state, I understand that you could be, I misspoke. Then you could be a licensed dietitian in the state of Oregon. If you're a licensed or certified nutritionist in another state, how can you then be a licensed dietitian and be called a dietitian when you don't meet the requirements set by the Commission on Dietetic Registration and even the requirements in our own law about how you become a dietitian, which is you present a current registration as a dietitian because you aren't one.
Okay. So this is Bob. So yeah, I heard that there was some potential misissuance of licenses. I understood that also that some of those did and were able to provide a CDR registration, which is also a requirement, right? Okay, so those that have not, if there are any, and there may be one, and they weren't issued a license at this point, we are looking into it. So we
Yeah.
did an audit, and Tina, if you're on here, there you go, your hand is up. Clarify it for me, Tina. Thank you.
Okay, so there has been some confusion. There is a couple individuals that have gotten a license. When we started researching this, if you go into North Carolina, Illinois, Massachusetts, I think, and there's one other place, to become a licensed dietitian in those states, you can also come through under being a nutritionist and come through taking the CNS exam. So when we started researching what it took to be able to take that exam and to become licensed in these different states, licensure under pathway 2 seemed like it was the pathway that they would come through. So in these other states, you have to have 1,000 hours and you can't have a bachelor's degree. You have to have a master's or a doctorate to be able to take the CNS exam. to be a nutritionist, and then those nutritionists can also get a dietitian license in those states. So, and they have to have 1,000 hours to be able to be licensed. So that's where it fell on when we started doing our research in the comparison and looking at pathway 2. It has to be equal to licensed, whatever criteria that dietitians have to do. And that's how I came to the conclusion. It was brought to me by a former employee that is no longer here, but that's the research we did.
So Tina, it's up. Heather Fogelsong. Heather, are you there?
I am. Good morning. I was just, if you don't mind, I was gonna just maybe go for a high level overview of this. My name is Heather Vogelsong, and I'm an attorney with the Oregon Department of Justice, and just wanted to jump in, and Tina and Bob, please correct me if this is incorrect, but the statute set forward the licensure pathways that would be possible for reciprocity, and that's the starting place where we would be. And then in addition to that, then the rules further clarify what that reciprocity requirements would be. So that's what Tina's referring to in terms of licensure pathway 2 and licensure pathway 3. And so that is set forward in rule 834-030-0000. And then Tina, correct me if I'm wrong, but what HLO does is it looks underneath the title of what other states do and looks at the qualifications and the requirements of the other state, looking at the other state's requirements, looking at the qualifications of the applicant. So it's not just based on title of where the person received a prior license, but you're looking underneath that title. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so just wanted to kind of go high level so kind of people knew where we were starting from in case there was a not that understanding. So thanks.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you, Heather.
So Tina, this is Bob and chair and members of the board. Tina, is it my understanding that some of the states or not the CDR, the nutritionists have to have a master's degree plus 1,000 hours? Is that 1,000 hours in supervised training?
It's a
experience?
master's degree or a doctorate.
Okay.
And 1,000 hours of training.
Okay. And then is it in some states they see the nutritionists as a higher qualification than the dietitians?
I'm not sure. I know that you can be licensed as a dietitian in those states if you carry those credentials.
Okay. Gotcha.
Um,
And so some states can be with the term that we use, true reciprocity, and others we may have to look further under the hood.
Correct.
Okay. I see Sarah's hand. Sarah?
I am sorry. The minute I did that, of course, Amazon came to deliver something. So
Okay.
it's not my dogs. I just had a question about, you were talking about the 1,000 hours of training. So as a dietitian, you have very structured different areas of training and supervised practice. Is that the same as a nutritionist in this license, or is it just any supervised training? Whereas then we would license them as a dietitian and perhaps they didn't have adequate training as a dietitian does.
I don't know. I don't think we've even got that far down that road.
Oh, okay.
But we are looking at it. And I see Jesse's hand up.
Yeah, Sarah, you kind of got to my question also. So this is straight off of our website. The experienced applicants must complete a planned continuous program of dietetic experience approved by the Health Licensing Office of 900 hours under the supervision of a licensed dietitian. So in our state, to be licensed, you have to have those hours under a licensed dietitian.
Okay.
And again, I understand about different states, and I'm not going to go through the process of getting licensure laws passed in a variety of states. It's very different, and our licensing law is 30 plus years old. But that's what the experience, if you were to get licensed in Oregon,
Mhm.
and you weren't licensed someplace else, you had to have that experience. And I guess I'm questioning, I guess in part of your looking at this, Bob and others, you might want to look what's the consider what our requirements are, and then look at what the requirements under those states, because they're very different. And we understand that a bachelor's degree is what was required 30 years ago. You know, now dietitians sitting for the registration exam as of January of 2024 have to have at least a master's degree. And all of these very structured elements in all of their programs are accredited at the undergraduate level, at the graduate level, and the supervised practice level, which I think with the nutrition programs, it's varied. The dietitian path is accredited. And they have to abide by the Department of Education standards for accreditation. And so there's just a difference. I am not saying black or white, but there's a difference. And
Sure.
we don't have anything in our statute about licensing nutritionists or people that don't meet what we've set out as the regulatory rules, I think. But, you know, I am only speaking from my limited knowledge of this.
Okay. Bob, I have a question or a comment.
Yes.
Okay, well, I had to go through this similar process when I was chair of the board of the athletic trainers accrediting association. Okay. What we gave reciprocity to the Canadians for athletic trainers was that we had to prove that all athletic trainers in the states or provinces
Mhm.
had to pass a national exam. And then the Canadians had to match that exam. And if they could match that exam, then they had reciprocity. Otherwise, they did not have reciprocity.
Mhm.
So I guess my question to the board is, where is the national accreditation for dietitians versus nutritionists? Am I
That
making
question,
sense?
I was just going to clarify, was that directed towards the board members, Russ?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
and I see Jesse's hand up, maybe with an answer.
Well, I can only speak to dietitians. So the dietitians are pass a national registration exam through the Commission on Dietetic Registration, which is recognized by the accreditation bodies within the country, which I don't know. Dietitians, the Canadian model and the US model that you described, Russ, is exactly the same for dietitians. Many Canadian dietitians become US dietitians, but we have been collaborative about our registration exam in both countries also. But
Okay.
you have to meet those same rigorous requirements from the other countries. So, and other countries we don't have much reciprocity with. They have to come to the U.S. and get more training. So, but Canada is like what you described.
Good. Okay, what about the nutritionists? Do we know anything about them?
And that-
I don't, so.
Yeah, so I think that's where we're at.
Yeah.
Is looking under the hood and gathering that information. The specifics for the education, and Tina's got her hand up. Go ahead, Tina.
I was just gonna say that the 1,000 hours is supervised clinical experience. Because that was asked. It would have to be researched more for those 1,000 hours for nutritionists.
So, what we would do from this point is gather the information, bring it to the board, you know, and just anecdotally do a side-by-side comparison and see where we're at with that.
Thank you. We'll look forward to that.
Okay,
Thank you.
and thanks for bringing that up, Jesse. The if we're ready to move on, seeing no other hands up, we have a policy discussion, and I'm going to get out of the way. You'll miss me, I know this, but I'm going to let Ann slide in here.
Record. My name is Ann Thompson. I'm a policy analyst here with the Health Licensing Office, and I've been working with the Board of Licensed Dietitians as long as I've been here, about 10 years. So some of these items were brought forth by our acting chair today, Jessie, and she will be leading the conversation in her capacity as both a board member and a chair. I feel, and perhaps the board, maybe Jessie could elaborate, but I think that a lot of our first item on the agenda, which was discussion about professional credentials and their requirements, we touched on a little bit when I placed the item under licensing and fiscal reports, which might have been an error on my part, Bob. I'm very sorry. I thought it was something that would go under licensing. So is there anything else that the board could provide us regarding the that board certified nutrition specialist, the BCNS credential, any other areas that HLO should be looking at when we compare credentials? Because periodically, some of our boards will consider adding a credential for the purposes of licensing. They might say it's equivalent, or there's this new thing, or this new organization, this new association, and they'll decide whether or not this is something that should be considered. And so I thought I would throw it out to the board and see if there are, first of all, you know, if there's anything out there that you think HLO and the board should consider when it comes to licensing. Are there any credentials, professional credentials out there that you think meet spec? Jessie?
So I'm gonna be pretty narrow about this, Anne, I guess. The state of Oregon licenses dietitians. Dietitians are credentialed through the Commission on Dietetic Registration, and they go through a accredited undergraduate, graduate programs and supervised practice. So they're at each step, everything's accredited by the accrediting arm of dietitians, which is Ascend. And unless we're a state that license or certifies nutritionists, everybody seems to me would have to meet our requirements of a registered dietitian because we license dietitians. And I don't know of any I don't know of any other credential that would be equivalent. But that doesn't mean there might not be others to consider, but it might be an interesting discussion for the board. I also know other licensing boards around the country, anybody that's seeking reciprocity, those all come through the board members and not only decided by the staff. And I'm just throwing that as an example because you have board members who have the specialty knowledge and from other boards, as Russ was talking about, that might be able to contribute to that discussion when reciprocity comes up. And then maybe we could figure out if there was some other route. But to my knowledge, and I went through and tried to find minutes online, those don't generally come to the board. But maybe that's a thought.
Tina, I see your hand up.
I was just looking at North Carolina. So individuals that are licensed as dietitians there have 3 different credentials that they can have to become a nutrition or dietitian there. And one is through the registered dietitian nutritionist exam. The other one is through the certified nutrition specialist exam. And the third is through American Clinical Board of Nutrition exam. And then when I looked at Illinois, it's the same thing. It's the CDR, the CBN, the CNS, and the Clinical Nutrition Certification Board. So I just wanted to throw out there the different pathways that these other states use to become a licensed dietitian. That's all.
Jesse, I see your hand up.
I just have a question for Tina, if I may. So North Carolina has the Board of Dietetics and Nutrition. Are they licensed dietitians or are they licensed nutritionists in Carolina? Or are they both licensed dietitian and nutritionists? Are they LDNs or LDs or LNs or I don't. I'm looking at their website right now.
That will be, now that this discussion is open, I will start researching it more in depth and look into all that.
Yeah, I think you might find that in those states that it's a licensed dietitian or a nutritionist that may be separate like Washington is, versus we're just a state with licensed dietitians.
Okay, thank you.
Just my thoughts.
So while we're working on this, just to let you know, as we get deeper into this, would the board be available to be subject matter experts to review or offer any sort of assistance as we go through this process? I see a nod from Jesse. Trying to track all these people on the screen. It's worse than the Brady Bunch, really. I see Sarah blipped.
Yes, yeah, I'd be happy to.
Is that something that would help you, Tina, if you need a subject matter expert?
Yeah, or whoever is going to be doing this. Yes, it would be great.
That'd be terrific. And as we get deeper into this, additional questions might come up, rule clarifications, but we're in the infant stages of this. So we'll see where it goes.
Great.
Yeah, and one of the struggles that we're having, we have a qualifications unit that did have 3 people in it, and now there's 1 person doing 3 jobs. And so there are some things that have gotten a little backlogged, and we're trying to get some positions filled. These are the folks that do these comparisons along with licensing. So be patient, but we are addressing it and we appreciate your help. If we don't have any other questions with that bullet point, we can move on to Jesse wanted cultural competency continuing education discussion.
Your favorite thing, Anne.
No, let's go, Jesse.
Yeah. So, for those of you who don't know, I spent my entire career, 40 years, being a manager of dietitians, and they still email me occasionally. So we, back in, I guess it was 2022, the Oregon Health Authority mandated that dietitians, along with all the other health professionals, have every 2 years a course or an approved course or training in cultural competencies. And there is a list of approved courses by that group that set up the implemented what was passed by the Oregon Health Authority. And Anne, correct me if I am totally wrong when I say stuff, please. I looked on a couple other websites like pharmacy and nursing about what they did, and they have very different things. But what I wanted to talk about today was the board has not, well, the ruling, my understanding is that the boards of these professional organizations can determine other routes of getting this competency rather than using the required or the approved ones on the list. And we've not done that as far as I know. And many organizations, including healthcare organizations, including the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the Commission on Dietetic Registration, etc., offer these kinds of trainings also, either for free or for much less money. And I was just wondering if there's a way to have on our website or a clarification about this, about what that maybe if it's a facility provided training, that would be okay. If they got it through other routes like the academy, that would be okay. I know we've said before we're not auditing that process at all, but people are really anxious that they might be out of compliance and lose their license if they don't take one of those predetermined, very expensive, not meant for dietitians on that list. So I just wanted to open that discussion.
No, and I'm absolutely happy that you did. I will just take a moment and caution you and other board members, if folks are contacting you as a board member, be very,
Yeah, it's
very
not that.
careful.
Yeah.
Okay, as
Yeah.
speaking on behalf of the board. Just
No,
wanted to
I
put
never
that out
speak
there.
on behalf. Yes, thank you for
Okay.
that.
No, it's great. And we all want to be helpful, and you're here because you want to be helpful and you have knowledge. And I just always caution folks, if they get into those areas, to send folks to us, because you never really know what people are asking. So this requirement is something of an ongoing struggle, not just for licensees, but for health licensing. If I can put us all on the Wayback Machine for a bit, this requirement for every other year cultural competency came as part of the 2019 House Bill 2011. Copy of it here. And Board of Licensed Dietitians was one of, A through V of professions that had to take cultural competency as a condition for renewal every other year. Now, part of the bill says the board shall encourage but not require the completion of continuing education approved by the Oregon Health Authority under 413-450. A board shall accept as meeting the requirements of this subsection continuing education that meets the skills requirements established by the authority by rule. And what that essentially means is you can take one of the classes that has been vetted by the Office of Equity and Inclusion, a very, very small part of the Oregon Health Authority, or you can consider education that meets the skills requirements by rule. Carrie, could you pull those requirements up for the board to look at?
Where's the,
Oh.
where's the mouse? Is she?
Ah.
They will see us.
So this is the page.
Oh,
Or well,
let me-
let's share our screen and make sure everybody's caught up. Let me know if you can see the screen.
Cannot see the screen.
Stand by.
Okay.
Can you see it now, Russ?
Yep.
Okay. So, can we make this any bigger?
Make Russ bigger?
Yeah.
No, because he'll cover your screen.
Oh, okay, fantastic. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of roll you through this. This office was tasked with approving cultural competency continuing education. The first thing I will say before I forget is that there's a grid, which I will show you, and it has, by the way, this is how people apply. This is how organizations apply to have their training approved to be on this list. And here's your boards, and here's the bill. Just because, don't look at it. I don't want to make you sick. I'm going to slide up to the top. Here we go. Approved trainings. This is the grid that Jesse was talking about. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Okay. It says healthcare professional. One thing that I will stress to you and to anyone who's listening, and for the record, that just because the healthcare professional does not list dietitians doesn't mean that they couldn't take it. Okay, this is not prescriptive. This is just the trainers or the organizations offering the training list off who might benefit. Just because they don't include you doesn't mean you can't take it. Okay, and we know there aren't a lot of them here, and yes, they can be expensive. Okay. The difficulty that we're having, where did it go?
Just fixed out of it.
Can you help me get it back? I'm sorry. Talking and tech don't always go together.
I am going to stop sharing for a second. Sorry.
I'm so sorry. It's so hard to talk and type and X at the same time. There it is. Okay, and then we can share again. Fantastic. Thank you guys for your patience. So we understand that there aren't a lot of things offered. Okay, what we were hoping, to Jesse's point, is that they would outline some basic skills or requirements in their rules so that boards could look at trainings. But let me find the matrix that they came up with. Here's the criteria. And classes can't just meet one part of this. Courses have to be comprehensive and hit every single one of these things.
So, can you go, you gotta hit each domain?
Everything.
Included in the domain.
Everything in the domain.
Okay.
So what this puts boards in the awkward position of having to do is to essentially become line item committees and have to look at comprehensive education and compare every single one of these points to that comprehensive education. That is an extremely time-consuming process. And for HLO to facilitate that, we just don't have the bandwidth, right? We were hoping there would be some simple concepts expressed simply, and that's not what happened. And this is why we are steering not just licensees to the grid, but also encouraging folks that have connections with associations like CDR to say, submit your training to the Office of Equity and Inclusion. How do I get back out to that?
And can you scroll down so I can see the top, what it says at the top of this grid?
Criteria for approval, cultural
Yes.
competence, continuing, yes, there it
But
is.
that's criteria for approval to get on their list.
Correct. So
Right.
anything but the way the bill is written, anything that boards approve outside of that list has to meet the skills requirements outlined in rule. This is the matrix they measure education against, and thus boards that are trying to look at offerings outside it must also consider this matrix when approving. And that's how the bill is written. And this is, it's very, very complex. And so are you still looking at this, Jesse?
No, I'm done. Thanks, Ann. I'm
Okay.
looking at my other screen where I
No,
jotted
that's
myself some
great.
notes.
And so what we encourage people, this website has applications. If CDR or one of these other organizations wants to have their continuing education approved, their cultural competency approved for this list, they can submit their education. They can fill out the CCCE application. This particular office reviews this education once a year. And then they can be added to the list. And what's interesting is they are allowing organizations to renew their education, keep it valid for 5 years. So again, I'm trying to be very careful with my words. It's very difficult to judge outside education against the grid. So having organizations submit their application to get on the grid is an option. Another option for licensees or members of the public or anybody, it can't be the board, it can't be us, is to actually get a legislative concept through and get opted out of this requirement. If you want to go through and have the statute changed that created this requirement saying, well, we already get this, you could submit a legislative concept that removes dietitians from this list of people that have to go through this. But those are the options as we see them. Does that make sense to everybody? Do you want me to X out of this website? Do we get a chance to look at it?
No.
Oh, I can't tell. Can we unshare? Okay. So now you're back up and we've got Jessie with her hand up.
Yeah, Pavlinak, and I'm sorry, I forget to say that all the time. So when I was reading HB 2011, there was a third point that said this, and I may be totally misinterpreting, and that's why I wanted this discussion. So what type of CCCE training modality will be accepted by the board, which is us, whether in person, online, experiential, service learning, cultural or linguistic immersion, employer provided, or in capital letters, courses approved by the Oregon Health Authority. So I read that employer provided was okay if the board thought it was okay.
Where are you reading that?
Oh, I copied it from HB 2011.
Which version? Did you get the enrolled version?
Ooh, that's what you're going to have to help me with. So I'm not sure.
Oh, no, it's fine. I'm just, because as it goes through the process, you have.
Yes, I'm sure that is absolutely
You have the
true.
first one out and then you have changes that get made. And I'm looking at the enrolled version, which is the mic drop.
Okay.
The board.
I'm looking at the enrolled version too. At least that's what the link said.
Okay, and so what section is it?
I don't know. I'm going to find it.
Thank you.
I just copied some stuff on a piece of paper.
No, I totally get it.
Well, I don't see it on there. Interesting. It's not
Yeah.
in that version, but what I got from someplace else on the website, but it said it was from that version, huh? Okay.
Because there's engrossed and then there's enrolled. And sometimes those things are very different. That's why I was a little, when you sent that to me, I was kind of scrambling because obviously I don't know all the answers.
Yeah.
But I was a little.
Well, I can look further. I was just
Okay.
trying to pull stuff together and
No,
wanting
and I
to know if there's
appreciate that.
anything we can do to help. I just think dietitians are pretty notorious about rulemaking, and it's making them angst, and they don't understand why they have to spend more money.
And you know, I completely understand that. And I understand the three values that we hold in Oregon close to our heart are transparency, inclusivity, and frugality. And we are always trying to find ways to save licensees money. And to the extent we are struggling with this too, because
Yeah,
we
I
know
know.
it's not easy. And so what we did was we developed rules A34050000 and continuing education, and pretty much lockstepped the bill. And so that's why I was a little wondering where that language came from. But again, the three options we see is you can take something off the list. And again, it doesn't have to say dietitians on it. If it looks interesting to you, take it. When we approached the Office of Equity and Inclusion about the cost, we were told that leadership was not considering cost a criteria. So we did ask on your behalf. And if an organization wants to have their material reviewed and put out there for dietitians, and it's up to them if they want to charge or not charge. You know,
Right.
some organizations are they have a very proprietary approach, and they're like, we spent money on this, and so we need to get our money back. If an organization wants to offer this at no cost and also say this would be good for any number of professions, that would be absolutely within their power to do. But right now I think I've outlined pretty clearly the rub on this one. And we completely understand.
Yeah, and I did do my due diligence and contacted Commission on Dietetic Registration, and they aren't interested in going through and getting this approved for a very small number of dietitians. We have, license, we're up to 1,400 or something like that.
Mhm.
There's over 100,000 in the country, and it's a pretty small chunk to have to go through the process outlined by one state. And so they aren't going to do it. Okay, thanks.
Okay, of course. It's always good to revisit these things because we also have new licensees that are coming through. And when something doesn't make sense, it's always nice to at least explain it so that if you understand the context, you can make appropriate decisions. So now the next thing that Jesse wanted on the agenda was the licensure compact. So what do you have for us, Jesse?
Well, and I think it was Russ that last meeting, said what are the requirements for dietitians, which we certainly have gone over ad nauseum, I think, today. So hopefully we won't have to do that. But I mentioned that nationally there is a dietitian compact has been presented at 12 different states, and Nebraska has just passed it. I know Oregon has a compact at least for physical therapists, and maybe others. But I just wanted to let the board know about that this potentially may happen in Oregon and not have much further discussion unless people wanted to. But the purpose of the compact is to facilitate interstate practice of dietetics with the goal of improving public access to dietetic services. This compact is being formed by, was put together by the Department of Defense and the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And you might go, why the Department of Defense? Is because dietitians or spouses of service people who are dietitians, because the licensure process in many states takes months. And thank you, Oregon, that ours doesn't take months. As someone who hired dietitians, it doesn't. But in many states, it takes months, and they can't earn a living because they don't have a license in that state. And so The compact will preserve regulatory authority of the state, so our state license is not affected if this happens to go forward. But it will ensure portability through a compact privileging grant. And this became really important during the pandemic when a lot of things were done via telehealth. And I know people that have, 3 to 5 licenses or even as many as 15 or 20 licenses in order to do telehealth around the country. And so this is certainly didn't get introduced in the last legislative session not by us, obviously, the board, but it is out there, and states are starting to introduce it around the country. So it's just an FYI.
Yeah, no, that's great when you mentioned it, because I love to look things up and learn about
Yes.
things. I found that this is, for those who don't know what it is a binding legal agreement between states to say that if you're licensed here, you can be licensed there. But it is something that has to be done at the legislative level.
Yep.
So it'd be very interesting to see. 2025 is a long session, and that's generally when big issues get addressed. And just as an FYI, Jesse, there was some talk about some interstate licensure compact information dealing with social workers. And I forget the other profession, but it was one of those things where you introduce a bill that has what's called a related to clause, and it's related to, let's just say, professional licensing. Well, anything having to do with professional licensing, that bill can be dumped. It's called a gut and stuff, where they just dump the whole thing and bring something all new in. And then that gets dumped out and something all new comes in. And what it sometimes does is facilitate conversations where maybe they're not ready to settle on one issue, but they want it out there. And there was a push for a task force on professional licensing modernization. We have all these little boards all over the place. What would it take to make portability better, reciprocity easier, licensing faster? And so there are conversations going out there. But again, what comes up in 2025, we don't know. So thank you for that. And we will keep an eye on it, obviously. That's what we do.
Yeah.
And so our next issue was scope of practice. Oh, does anybody, are we keeping up with everybody? Does anybody have any questions? Thanks. I'm typing and I don't always look at the screen. So, okay, thank you. Just want to check in on everybody. So what have you got, Jesse, on scope of practice?
Yes, thank you. And anytime people email me, I send them to you. And I know you've had conversations around this, I think, recently, because I'm not having conversations. But I did want to just talk about scope a bit based on our rules and regulations, not our law. So if you go to our licensing webpage and look up our rules and regulations on standards of practice and professional conduct, which is Division 60, I think is correct. Under Chapter 834 of Division 60. I get confused by rules and regs at the state level, how to really say those.
Absolutely. No, the rules for standards of professional conduct, by the way, you're doing great, is Division 60.
Yep. So under that, under point 1, and if people want me to share my screen, I can, but point 1, it says under standards of practice, use systematically reviewed scientific evidence in making food and nutrition practice decisions. And so I just wanted, just as an FYI, and I can send this to you, there's a 2024 scope standards of practice, a brand new document that is evidence-based, et cetera, and talks potentially about the expansion of the scope of dietitian practice based on evidence. I'll use an example, and it was probably even before your time, Ann, but if it wasn't, please correct me. When order writing for diets in hospitals, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services came out and said dietitians should be able to independently write orders for diets because physicians aren't trained in that area. And so we did come to the board back in the day and make sure that wasn't against the rules. It certainly wasn't covered in a 30-year-old law. And since it was evidence-based and cost-effective based on CMS, the board said if the facility approved this, it was okay. And so I'm just, I know that it also says on our website that the board doesn't get involved in scope of practice that has to go through lawyers, or you give, there's some information about that, Anne, is that correct? Yeah. But what I'm hearing, and I am clear that I am me and I'm not on the board when they tell me this stuff, is that there is a feeling that the board is not supportive of expansion of scope, even if the institution where they work of is, and even if it's evidence-based and documented in an evidence-based or systematic review about that dietitians can do such and such. And I just wanted, I didn't know where we stood on that. So I
Right.
thought I'd bring it up again.
Well, I have to applaud you. That was a lot to unpack that you just handled right there. Well, as you mentioned, well, there's a lot of things there. First of all, yes, your law is old, and the scope, the practice of dietetics is defined in statute, and it is very broad, having to deal with nutrition and let's see, I can actually.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's because
Yeah.
I was involved in that process, it's broad for a reason.
Oh, no, and I totally get it, right? Dietetic practice means the integration and application of principles derived from sciences of nutrition, biochemistry, food management, physiology, behavioral and social sciences to achieve and maintain the health of people through assessing nutritional needs, establishing priorities. And then we have evaluating and making changes in food, diets, and nutrition services, right? So that's kind of all about food. What's difficult about your statute, and we are creatures of statute. We can only do what we are allowed specifically in statute to do, right? You have a Title Act.
Yes.
Which means that you can't call yourself a licensed dietitian without the license, but the practice of nutrition is not protected in Oregon, like medicine and law. You cannot practice law without a license. You cannot practice medicine without a license. This is why you go into LifeSource and they try to sell you tinctures and things like that. So what makes the scope difficult, and I want to put on the record that we're not standing in the way of, it's not a support issue. It's a black and white, what can and can't we do? A lot of the scope of dietitians is determined by their workplace. A dietitian who works in a transplant unit at OHSU is going to have a different looking day than a dietitian who, say, works for an insurance provider who's helping somebody try to manage their weight or make better food choices. And so I've been getting a lot of calls. Mainly, I would categorize them as chain of command issues. Okay. I have a patient who maybe needs their insulin adjusted. Can I do this, or does it have to go through the primary care? I have a pharmacist who won't allow me to adjust insulin. There's all of these chain of command issues. And I don't really think the board has anything that can clarify that. If there's something specific, now we don't give legal advice, which is somebody asks a question, we look at the law and interpret it, right? That's practicing law. We can't do that. Sometimes if there are gray areas and we feel like an FAQ might be helpful, in some of our professions, we have, well, I can just clarify this, turf issues, really. Like, can we do this? Can we not do that? How does our license intersect with another license? I see your hand up, Sarah. And we might do like an FAQ. But I'm not sure how that would play a role in this scenario. Sarah, what have you got?
Oh, I just was wanting to go back and clarify a little bit. So when you were talking about how nutrition isn't, the practice of nutrition isn't covered, say like medical, who can provide medical care or things like that. I thought that medical nutrition therapy was a specific
No, what
thing
I
just for
meant, and let
dietitians.
me clarify if I'm talking too fast. There are certain professions statutorily you cannot do the work without a license. The profession is protected. One of the ones we
Okay.
oversee here is genetic counseling. And the statute itself says you cannot practice genetic counseling or purport yourself to be a genetic counselor without being licensed under that statute. That
I
means
see.
the
I'm sorry.
work is protected. Like you cannot practice law without a license. Anyone who's had like a debate at home with their spouse and they say, hey, now you're practicing law without a license. That is protected in statute. But nutrition, foods, what you should eat, what you should buy, that work itself in Oregon is not protected. Only the title. You cannot call yourself a licensed dietitian or use the abbreviation LD.
Uh-oh.
And we
I
can't
lost you
hear
too.
you.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Oh,
Yep.
good. And we're back. We are back. Thank you, Bob, who is the best tech support person, honestly. We're getting ready, by the way, just as an aside, we're getting ready to completely tear our room apart and rebuild it with more connectivity and all that. So hopefully these little issues will be in the past.
Cameras on.
Okay. Where's my, okay. So, to get in the Wayback Machine, as I was saying, nutrition in Oregon, the work itself is not protected. Like the
correct.
work of like a doctor, you cannot be a doctor without a license. You cannot practice law without a license. And other professions will be right in statute. You cannot do this work. Dietetics is not that way. So, you know, if you feel like an FAQ, I mean, we can certainly talk to our Department of Justice attorneys. An FAQ might help people. We can't give legal advice, but if you feel like there are some issues having to do with scope or anything like that, that we could convey with an FAQ, if you think that would help, we could certainly look at that. If there might be some bigger issues that might be addressed if you got your statutes updated. They are very
Right.
old.
Yeah.
And that's not something the board can do because,
No.
again, we are the executive branch. We do what the legislation tells us to do. In your capacity as an individual, you certainly could bring a concept forward. You're welcome to testify on one. We will reiterate that if you go to the legislature to testify on anything, do note that you're a board member, but you're not there in your board member capacity. You're wearing your hat as a licensed dietitian or an interested party. Okay, and that just as long as you clarify what hat you're wearing when you sit there, because like Jessie said, how many 40, 50 hats you have? You have so many things that you do and activities that you engage in, so it's good to let them know. So what do you think about the scope thing? I mean, how are we doing? Jessie?
Pavlinak here. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, and I know we have no scope in our, and you know, if the Oregon Dietetic Association or whatever we're called now wants to put something forward to, there's model scope laws out there that they could use. But the board, it is a facility decision. But the board, people are concerned that if they practice in a certain way that's outlined in the standards of practice and evidence-based, that the board might say they're outside of their scope. Well, because we don't have a scope, you can't be outside of the scope of a licensed dietitian. You can only be outside of the scope at your facility, I think you were saying, or am I misinterpreting?
Well, no, you're getting there mostly.
Okay.
But you do have a scope in that the definition of dietetics practice is in statute. It
Right.
focuses on food, it focuses on nutrition, it talks about goals and objectives that meet nutritional needs.
Right.
I'm not saying you don't have a scope and that you can go out and start doing Botox tomorrow, okay, under your nutrition license. That is not entirely true. Your scope is very broad, but it deals with nutrition, food systems. Okay. It's not that you don't have any scope and you can go out tomorrow and start doing laser surgeries or eye surgery. It has to focus on nutrition. Now, within the world of nutrition, it's very broad. But as long as you're within the world of nutrition, now, if we get the way HLO operates, and I've had some questions that made me wonder if the grapevine out there thought that we were, you know, doing dragnet stuff and going out and looking at people. If we got a complaint, and you saw the regulatory reports, we don't have too many. If we got a complaint that said this dietitian was outside their scope when they did X, that's where our regulatory department really shines. They would ask for records. They would do interviews. They would find out what happened, what was said, what was done, and then they would compare those facts to what exists now in statute. And if we got a complaint that a dietitian was doing Botox, well, we would check and see if they also had an advanced esthetician license.
Yeah.
Because maybe they were doing the Botox under that, or maybe they were also a physician's assistant. So they're these overlapping authorities, right? And that's where our regular department gets down in the weeds and pulls out all the details and tries to see, was this dietitian outside the laws and rules in Oregon? And that's where, if there was a sanction, if there was some case like that, that would come before the board. And we would say, okay, this is what we found. Are they outside? But the idea that we are just going to run around and hunt people down is just, that's just not the mechanisms under which we operate.
Yeah. I just think there's some fear about that because everybody wants to be in compliance.
Absolutely. And honestly, what we love is that most people want to do the right thing for the right reasons. Right. And that's why I get so many phone calls. I probably get between 3 and 10 a week from dietitians who want to do the right thing. And they say, I work in a hospital. Do I have to change a diet for a cardiac patient through an MD? And my answer is always the same. Check with your HR department. Check with your policies and procedures within your facility to do so that you clearly understand chain of command.
Yeah, and they also need to go through the pro board or the medical board to get privileging around that too. So,
and I didn't even know what that was until you said that. So yeah, we have our role in licensing. But once people get licensed, we have no authority over workplaces. Some people keep their licenses and they don't even work. You know, maybe they're taking a break, but they want to keep their license current if they want to come back. You know, maybe they're retired, but they want to keep the credential up because they're very proud of it. So once people leave the zone of licensing, unless they run afoul and we get a complaint and we look into it, and some complaints are unfounded. You know, we get complaints that are under our jurisdiction, that are not under our laws and rules. If they are under someone else's, we'll refer them to another board because we want them pursued. But if they're outside our authority, there's not much we can do. Is that helpful? Okay, how are we doing, everybody? Does anybody have any more questions? Because I think what that brings us to with conclusion, just to circle back, do you think that an FAQ on any of this, if we worked up something with the Department of Justice, is there anything that I said that was so foreign to the board that you feel a clarification would somehow be helpful? Or are the questions out there outside our purview? Think about it. Or, you know, what do you think, Jesse?
Well, I was surprised when I went on the website recently. We have no FAQs at all.
No, you've never had anything that was so contentious or so confusing. Also to speak to your point, your statutes are 30 years old. People have been living in these things for long enough. They kind of know the edges, and they're fairly simple and they're fairly black and white. When we generally use FAQs is when we have, say, well, one of our boards is does therapy for abusers, and they wanted to know if the people who are evaluating some of these people pre-court, like before they go to court, do they have to have the certification in order to evaluate these people? And that's a great question, because one set of therapists is in the rehabilitation area and one is doing evaluation. And their question is, if they're evaluating, do they have to have our certification? Well, that's affecting people's lives. That affects how people do their work and what kind of work they can do. And that is when two professions have an overlap. That's when FAQs really shine. When we have a new program called the Temporary Staffing Agency Program, where we license companies, some of which are not even LLC in the United States, right? And they wanted to know, how do we do fingerprints? I mean, some of these companies are based in the Netherlands. They're like, but they have to provide fingerprints. Well, how do we do that? And the FAQ was a great way to get information out there so that our qualifications people were not on the phone all day long answering the same questions over and over and over again. So it was just a guideline for folks that aren't familiar with Oregon. How does it work? How does fingerprinting work? So here you go. So sometimes it's a clarification. Sometimes it's like a most commonly asked questions, you know, that we can get to, and you can do it yourself. You don't have to try to get through on the phone lines. So there's lots of different reasons. And in dietetics, there's never really been any of those examples that have driven something like that. It's not to say you can't have one if you really want one, but I mean, do you think that there's anything here right now that would call for something like that? And you don't have to answer right away. You can think about it. Some of our greatest ideas come when we're, getting ready to go to bed. If you decide, hey, I think this would be great to put on the website or send out to licensees or whatever, we're happy to do it. We just have not had that opportunity. It hasn't really been called for. I think I've talked everyone to sleep, and I am so sorry for that.
No, I have.
No, Jesse, no, you're very, I love people that are passionate about public service and are passionate about what they do. It makes our job really invigorating, to engage in dialogue and do a better job taking care of Oregon, right? That's where these conversations go, and it's great. So if we're okay for right now, what I can do is, Jesse, you might have a script for public and interested parties feedback. We have a lot of people on the phone right now.
Yeah.
So I will, it might be a little awkward getting recognized and saying what you need. Please, if you wish to speak, say your first and last name. Don't forget to let Carrie Edwards on the email know, because for the public record, we have to say who was here and who spoke. And also, I'll let the board know that this doesn't have to be a dialogue. This doesn't have to be an interrogation or a question and answer period. If people just want to say what they want to say, you don't necessarily have to respond. This is just a place for people to air concerns. So I will hand it over to you and back to Director Mr. Bothwell.
So at this time, the Board of Licensed Dietitians will hear public or interested parties' feedback. Members of the public, please wait until you've been recognized, just as Ann said, and once recognized, please state your name and affiliation to the board for the record. Thank you, Bob.
Told you I'd be back. Sorry. Okay, so are you the public or are you staff? Carrie's got her hand up already. Shelley, huh?
Wilman.
Shelley Willman. Are you there? We'll unmute
Sorry,
your
this
mic.
is oh,
Okay, go ahead.
this is Shelley Willman. I am a licensed dietitian with the state of Oregon. I guess I just kind of had a question. I am not originally from here. I am from Montana, where I was a licensed nutritionist, but under that state, I had to go through all of the undergrad schooling, sit for the national exam, become registered with the CDR. So for me, it was just a change of initials behind my name. But after I was on this call, as Ann stated, I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. So in the state of Oregon, under the section of food, so there are really no regulations regarding food and nutritionists. Does that mean that, and someone kind of clarified what medical nutrition therapy is, because as a dietitian, that is what we do. We've gone to school and we have studied all these diseases and disorders, and we know how food correlates with those diseases and disorders. So my question is, as someone in Oregon who calls themselves a nutritionist and may not have had the extensive schooling and supervised practice hours and training as dietitians, so if I go to a nutritionist and I have high blood pressure, can that nutritionist tell me how to eat for my high blood pressure?
The nutritionist specifically is, there's no statute around it that I'm aware of. I could be wrong. Maybe it's under the medical board, but there may not be anything out there. And I see the chair shaking her head. There just may not be anything out there regulating it.
So
Similar to
strictly,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
so the reason that Oregon has a licensure law for dietitians is strictly for Medicare billing.
Do you want me to jump? Go ahead, Jessica.
Chair.
The licensure law precedes anything to do with Medicare and Medicare billing. It really was to protect the public by having a state licensure law to have licensed dietitians. But as Ann said, it is only a title act. It doesn't really, affect anybody like anybody else can give out nutrition information.
Okay,
but also it is to be recognized that the people that hold an LD are qualified to do that, and there are no other statutes that qualify anybody else from a statutory kind of thing, if I'm saying that correctly.
Yes, Jesse, this is Anne. One more thing, building on what you're saying. It's my understanding that a lot of employers, not just insurance companies, but employers wanting to make sure that the employees that they
Yep.
hire have a certain level of education and supervised experience. They require an LD for the employment purposes. Also, some insurance companies, if they're going to help you manage your weight or your high blood pressure, the people that they hire to do that work via telehealth or in person, they might require an LD. So it is a title for our purposes, but in the world and the workplace, the credential is recognized for a lot of different reasons.
Okay, and I just have one more question. So if I have high blood pressure and I go to a nutritionist in the state of Oregon, the nutritionist can tell me how to eat according to my disease, and that is within their guidelines?
We don't oversee nutritionists, so I don't know what they can do.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for being on the call today.
It's my first time, so thank you.
You did great. Welcome. Well, no, we love feedback. We love for you to attend. And you know, you can always call the office or email me and we'll help you to whatever extent we can.
Thanks again, Shelley. Was there anybody else? Oh, Kelly Omberg.
Hi, Kelly Ornberg. I'm a licensed dietitian, and I've been in contact with Anne. So thank you. She gave me civics lessons 103, she said, which I very much appreciate. Yeah, there has been a group of us who've been chatting just because we've been running into the same barriers within all of our different organizations. And so that's where there has been probably more calls to Anne. I know that. And a lot of it has come, I'm just going to state this as, we have had other disciplines say, you adjusting insulin is the example, but there's many other examples of what, the 2024 scope of practice entails, is saying that, adjusting insulin is outside of the scope of our license because their license is very specific. So I know we've talked through that, but I did just want to bring up another point. Could Oregon license the practice of MNT? And that might have been what Shelley was after there.
Say that one more time.
Like,
could Oregon license?
Could Oregon license the practice of MNT and have a clear exemption in the Medical Practice Act?
So
Does that
medical
make sense?
Yeah,
nutrition?
Yeah,
medical nutrition therapy. They certainly could. I mean, I'm not familiar with the medical board and their scopes and their subsections and the authorities that they hold. But if medical nutrition therapy is out there and not regulated in any way, certainly any individual, as I mentioned, or association could decide that this is something that for public safety needs to be regulated. It can't be to make sure you get paid or professional protectionism or any of that stuff. But if you can make an argument that only certain professions should do this, or professionals should do this work, you're certainly welcome to go to the legislature with a concept and say you want to create a new license under the medical board or under something else and come up with the criteria and come up with an argument for why it needs to be done and why a law needs to solve the problem. I'm just giving you the inside track here. And identify any stakeholders who might be opposed to it because the legislature does not like to mediate arguments, and have it drafted up and give it a go. And you could establish a credential, you could establish license type under dietitians or under the medical board or under somebody else. But yeah, you're always welcome to do that. But I don't know if it currently exists because my world is not the medical board world. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Was there anybody else? Was there anybody else that emailed Carrie? That would have seen, okay.
So is there anything they want on there?
All right, so that concludes the public interested parties feedback. Chair and members of the board, are there is there any other board business that you would want to talk about, or something we can bring to the next board meeting, or at least work on between now and the next board meeting? And so we have the CNS piece noted. Are you guys not hearing me? Are you hearing me?
Yes.
I can
Oh,
hear you.
okay. Okay.
It's good to check.
I thought, uh-oh, we lost it again.
Well, if anything comes up, you know who I am and where I am, and I am happy to add anything. As Jesse wanted to know, if you have anything you want the board to discuss, just let me know. And if it's something I can just answer you, great. If I can direct you, great. If I can add it to the agenda, also great.
This is Sarah Lowe. I'm sorry to go back and ask about this really fast, just because we were talking about MNT and I was looking at the standard of practice and professional conduct on the Oregon Health Board. And it does say that document and communicate the nutrition care process in a timely manner. Now, Jesse, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't MNT part of the nutrition care process?
You are not incorrect. I mean, again, our licensure law was well before all of that was developed. But medical
it
nutrition,
says it's in the standard of practice.
yes, that was added on. So
Under
I guess
which board?
ours,
Health Licensing Office Board of Licensed Dietitians.
it's
Division
0.6.
60.
Oh, you're in your scope of practice in Division 60?
Yeah, in
Yeah,
Division
yeah.
60.
Yeah.
It says document and communicate the nutrition care process in a timely manner. Because I guess I was under the assumption, I think like people on the call, that MNT was a dietitian specific covered process that we did. And so the nutrition care process, I think MNT falls within that.
Yeah, this is the first I'm hearing of this, so I didn't know that.
If I may,
Go ahead.
so this is Pavlanak again. The dietitians on this call will understand this. So there are two CPT codes that have been developed around medical nutrition therapy. So that's Common Procedural and Terminology Codes, which is part of the American Medical Association, and they are specifically around medical nutrition therapy. Qualified healthcare providers, which dietitians are, and if you're in the state of Oregon, you have to be licensed in order to bill for this and I know billing has nothing to do with this sort of, but it does with Medicare. But dietitians are listed as qualified healthcare providers. Nutritionists are not in the AMA CPT book. And in that book, we have medical nutrition therapy. So with that inference, I think I would agree with Sarah because it is part of the nutrition care process, which is assessment, intervention, etc. So, and we can look at that. I can provide you with that, Anne, if you want. And Sarah, did that help or not?
No, it does. I was just reading
Yeah.
that and I thought,
Yeah.
I think the MNT is part of the nutrition care process. I was pulling back my
It is, and
education.
by the American Medical Association, they recognize medical nutrition therapy as a service and is provided within scope of a qualified healthcare provider, and dietitians are that. Nobody will argue that, and nutritionists within the AMA definition of qualified healthcare providers are not. and I will declare my potentially conflict of interest. I sit on this panel for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the MACPT panel. So that's how I kind of know this stuff. So I will declare that bias. I should have done that up front, or that potential conflict if you think it is.
Well, thank you very much for adding that, Jesse. I think you're okay.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to. I look terrible in orange.
Doesn't everyone? So is there anything else, folks?
Along those, I'm sorry, this is bad. I shouldn't be chair. Along those lines, those rules and regulations, how did those get amended or clarified or updated in language now that we kind of have had that conversation that Sarah brought up, if we need to consider that?
You're talking about your
Yes,
rules.
ours. Standard, yeah, Division 60 Standards of Practice and Professional Conduct. What's that process?
Well, it's we can convene a rules advisory committee, and we can go through the rules and update them. I mean, there's a whole process for it that takes time. But yeah, it's that particular one, as I'm looking at it, was last done 12 years ago ish.
Yeah, that's when the nutrition care process came out.
Yeah, so we can certainly take a look at it and get it on Ann's radar to work with the board and get a committee together.
Are there specific points, Jesse, that need to be, is what we have here, is it missing something? Has something changed? Or does something need to be added? Because if you could kind of parse that out, it would give me an idea of how simple or how complex. Because when you talk about standards, that's a whole kind of a gray area. And a lot of people will want to give feedback.
Yeah.
And so if I understand the world that we'll be targeting, I can do a better job at efficiently moving it through the process. So if you want to kind of brainstorm that and think this is missing something doesn't reflect today's world anymore, or if something needs to be changed, it was this and now it needs to be that. If you could kind of think about that and let me know, that would give me an idea of the process of updating it.
And just, Pavlonak again, and just clarification of that, and each individual board member needs to, if they want to give you feedback, needs to do it as an individual, because we cannot talk amongst ourselves. Is that correct?
We don't want to have an inadvertent board meeting. You're absolutely correct. However, yeah, you can reach out to me. The way it works generally is I'll get an idea of what the problem is. Now, sometimes that comes from our attorneys through a case that there's a loophole. Sometimes standards of practice are updated externally, and we need to look at, do we want to adopt the most recent version of something? And sometimes there's a dramatic change in the profession, and our standards need to encompass that. So once I know what the change is, then what we'll do is we will come up with draft language, kind of like what do you think? We'll design the car, right? Then we bring it to the Rules Advisory Committee. There are crash test dummies. They're the ones that get behind the wheel and say, does it work? Does it make sense? Does it work for a variety of different stakeholders, not just the public, but practitioners and recipients of services, the investigators? Does all of this make sense? We vet it through the Department of Justice to make sure we're within our rights to do these things and we're not outside our scope. And then we bring it to the board. We bring all of that to you. You adopt then proposed rules. That goes out for public comment. Everyone gets a chance to weigh in.
Yep.
We gather all that up, bring it to you. Say, this is what was said. You could make tiny changes at that point. Or you can say, we need to make big changes. That brings you all the way back to the beginning of the process.
Yeah.
Because we don't make major changes and then spring them on people, right? That's just not how it works. So that process of inclusivity, rules advisory, public comment It can take a while, but good things are always worth doing, right? So just let us know, really look at this and say, what isn't working, what's missing, what's outdated, and what do we have to do about it? And I can start that process for you.
And so any board member who wishes to, you can go online
Absolutely.
and you can see all that. And I will send you something in the next couple of weeks about potential from me personally. Just to
Potential
let you know.
changes?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
And
but-
any
but anybody
information,
else?
no, and any information that you feel would be great to put in front of the rack to back up any potential changes, anything like that, send it to me and I will make sure it gets in front of the right people.
Thank you.
Glad I got all that off my chest. I could.
Like the ghost in the corner of the screen here.
Thought I had my mouth moving. You guys would have thought, uh-oh.
Your voice changed a lot, Bob.
It does. Okay. So, Chair, members of the board, if there is nothing else, Chair, you can adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, everybody, for your participation. And again, thank you for all the public members attending.
Thank you.
At this time, the Board of Licensed Dietitians meeting is adjourned at 11:07 a.m. today. And thank you very much. And hopefully Yulia will be back next time.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody.
You did great, Jesse.
Thanks.
Good job, Jesse.
Good seeing you.
Oh, thanks, Russ. Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Stay on with her.